Good evening, everyone, and thank you very much for being here. The traffic, the pollution, the winter cold, and of course, Mr. Modi's magic makes it daunting to step out from one's home. So a double thank you to all of you. That was Payal Puri. She didn't introduce herself, but she's one of the founders of Algebra. And like a ritual every time, I'd like to welcome all of you on behalf of the ladies in black. The other women that you don't get to see on stage, Nina, Shuli, Anjali, Ritu. We have a new addition, actually, a young girl called Anuja, who's also joined all of us. And we all really, really welcome you to Algebra. Like Payal was saying, the reason we start our evening every time with some sort of description of Algebra is because this is a project in making. And each time we try and flesh out a different facet of our own personality. In addition to what Payal said today, I'd like to say that one aspect of Algebra that we want to enliven today is to move out of our comfort zones, to move out of the settled ideas that we live with. And events this last week demand that we move out of our comfort zones. We have just gone through two tectonic events, as our invitation to you said. On November 8th, Mr. Modi, at 8 p.m., announced that 86% of Indian currency would turn to paper. That is pretty much unprecedented in the financial history of this country. The opposition has called that Tughlaq's Firman, have called him Modi Antoinette. People from Arun Shourie to Govindacharya, to indeed the RSS Farmers' Wing, to Shatrughan Sinha, to many of his own allies, the Shiv Sena, to many, many people in the commentariat, as we call ourselves, have been critical of this, worried about it, disturbed. And yet there is also a distinct class of people, optimists, who believe that this is a political masterstroke. Which one is it? Was the action itself warranted? Is it going to achieve the outcomes it has stated? Is this good for the economy? Is this good for us politically? Yes, it is something that breaks the status quo, but what is it that we are looking at beyond the status quo? Those are the set of questions that are really facing us today. Are we really looking at an imaginative divide between urban and rural India? Are we living in cocoons where information about 90% of India doesn't reach our drawing rooms? Are we living in that kind of soundproof room that America has suddenly had to wake up from? Which brings me to the next day after November 8th, when America woke up to its own storm. And it's not just America, it's the entire world. As Michael Moore so memorably put it, and pardon my language, it is the biggest fuck you in the history of man that Mr. Trump was elected. It is the Molotov cocktail that the masses have thrown into the drawing rooms of the elite. And over this last 10 days, as we've gathered our breath, many, many theories are beginning to slowly take root. What really went down there? And when I say what went down there, I'm very aware that, again, I represent one perspective. There are others who have welcomed, quite apart from the electorate that has voted Mr. Trump in. There are those who are optimistic about it, who see it as a new sort of radical shift in global politics. And of course, one must give respect to the idea of democracy when indeed people vote leaders in that shock the very system, that shock some of the settled ideas, not just of European history, but I would say of human history. Ideas of equality, ideas of gender sensitivity, ideas of political correctness. Why is there an impatience with that? Why is there an impatience with the economic order that we have all come to take for granted? People are now calling it the anti-global mood, the anti-elite mood, the anti-immigrant mood, a desire for a shutdown, a closer home. So there are all these signals. So the conversation that we're going to look at today is really vast. It's going to look at America, it's going to look at India, and then it's going to look at the really interesting third component, which is what are the signals? What are the lessons? What are we being challenged with? What are the new ideas of economy that we really should be articulating? Can we go back to business as usual? To discuss all of that, we have an excellent panel today. We have Surjit Bhalla, who you see on television every day, an accomplished economist, Not somebody I necessarily always agree with, but somebody I always respect. There's Ajay Jhakar, who is a farmer and also an advocate for farmer policies. We are a farmer-indifferent country, and that is something we would like to discuss. And both Surjit and Ajay are hot off the oven with a discussion with Arvind Subramaniam and Arun Jaitley just last evening. And so we'll get to hear some of what's going on in the power corridors. And then there's Pavan Varma. Most of all, before we even discuss his career, he's a member of Algebra, so a round of applause for him. And of course, he's a career diplomat, a very distinguished foreign service public figure, but also now with the JDU. And it is very important to have him here because we are in danger of equating opposition or criticism with instantly anti-nationalism or someone who supports corruption. And those, in fact, are the things that we need to move away from. I look forward to a very, very lively conversation today. We have called the session The Rise of the Precariat, and through the conversation that ensues, hopefully we will flesh out what is this precariat, what is this new term that people are talking about. So ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Surjit, Pavan, and Ajay on stage. Thank you. Our invitations had also said that Mr. Chidambaram would be here today. Unfortunately, he's stuck in Bombay and couldn't catch a flight. But he'll be here next Saturday with Omar Abdullah, and I hope we have all of you back here again. Just as I was getting on stage, Manit, who's also the principal and owner of the Heritage Schools, was complaining, saying that you guys are running a show that's eating up our social life. And, you know, we are here. And the 2 evenings I get out, I want to be at Algebra. I applaud that. We would like to take over your social life. And we hope to see you here next Saturday as well. I just wanted to explain why Mr. Chidambaram's not here.
Hello.
So I wanted to start closer home, both chronologically and in terms of urgency. So Surjit, you know, like I said, there is a division in the idea of what Mr. Modi has done. Intention as well as efficacy, and then the outcome. Those are the three aspects that I'd really like to discuss. So just first up, and succinctly, do you approve, and what do you think has been achieved in the last 10 days or indeed with this move?
Prior to that, you said...
Can all of you hear him?
Yeah. You know, this thing...
You said something at the beginning, which I think it's very important to get clear. You said this was unprecedented in India. It's slightly wrong, in the sense it's not only unprecedented in India, it's unprecedented in the world. Human history does not have, country history, does not have a country undertaking demonetization on the scale that we have taken, or anywhere even close to it, which is not suffering from hyperinflation. Our inflation rate right now is 4.2%, and we did have, in 1978, when we, if you will, demonetized the 2,000 rupee note, and that was 2% of the cash. So absolutely unprecedented. And therefore, I think the government has been working in the dark. They didn't have a template. And maybe some of the problems that are occur because of that. Now, coming directly as an answer to your question. I think potentially, and in my view, I think the potential will turn into reality. I'm giving a probability, though these days after the Trump victory, one shouldn't make any forecasts. But potentially, this is big, big bang. This is the biggest reform that India could potentially undertake. And if things turn out as I think they should, it'll be bigger than the 1991 reforms.
Okay, that's a big statement, Surjit, and I'll come back to it. Pavan, your party has been divided on the demonetization move. Mr. Nitish Kumar has cautiously applauded the intention, but criticized the outcome. So very quickly, whether you personally approve of this or not, but much more than that, I really want to look at the implementation, but also the outcome. the claims that Mr. Modi made is that this is going to wipe out corruption, that we won't have to worry about even a corrupt mosquito in the country after this. Has that really been achieved? Let's just start with corruption. Then we can move to the idea of cashless economy, a greater tax net, the disappearance of counterfeit money, the disappearance of terrorism money. We can look at all of those. But let's start with the first intention, corruption. Do you think this has tackled corruption?
Now, first of all, I want to say that there's no division in the GD. Can I be heard? We don't have a division in the JDU, but our position is legitimately nuanced. Mr. Nitish Kumar welcomed the move because we believe no right-thinking person can stand against a policy decision whose intent is to attack the parallel economy, the linkage of that economy with terrorism, and the menace of counterfeit money. At the same time, he was among the first to say that the government's preparedness to implement this intent is certainly not in evidence. And there are reasons for it. When Surjit says that it is the most unprecedented step since Mohenjo-daro, we have to bear in mind some facts that it is in fact, but has it taken into account the ground realities and prepared for them adequately? Roughly half, 47% of this country's people are not linked to the banking network. 300 million people don't have valid ID cards. 98% of the rural economy is a cash-based economy. And 80% of the entire economy functions on the basis of cash transactions. Now, whether it will attack corruption, a goal which we support, we are aware that only 6%, or roughly, figures vary, 5, 4, 6%, of black money is in the form of cash. The rest is in Benami properties, in gold and bullion, and abroad. So whether it will attack black economy, I don't know. I wrote a column yesterday in Times of India where I said that unless you begin to go to the root causes of the generation of black money, and there I think the biggest, the beej, the seed of corruption in India is the linkage between unaccountable money and politics. In fact, I ended the column by saying the real intent in terms of its bona fides of Prime Minister Modi would be if now he also says that he will fight the next elections without the support of unaccounted money. Because once you have that nexus, corruption will continue to grow. And by the way, not to be partisan, I said all political parties should rise to this challenge. The Election Commission, Shoma, has put up 6 times precise recommendations for the reform of the electoral law, which will sever this nexus between unaccounted money and politics. And no political party will take action on it. So given this, I believe that somehow the Indian ingenuity to be able to go around laws which believe they are a magic wand to curb corruption should never be underestimated. And since we are attacking only currency, I believe corruption and the black economy will not furnish. In fact, I'm very worried, although we welcome the move, that it seems that already a parallel infrastructure has come into place with a very, very detailed and sophisticated system of intermediaries who are converting money, black money, back into white, be it through Jan-Dhan Yojanas, be it through the money of common man who have cash but not black money, and it's working already. So therefore, I believe that to attack the black economy is right, to prepare for it is important, because the vast inconvenience is a very mild word.
Suffering.
The sheer dislocation of the economy, and the jury is out. Whether in the months to come, it will lead in the long term to the good of the economy, or it will create new problems without solving old ones.
No, Pavan, thank you for that. I think that within literally 2-3 hours of the announcement, Indian ingenuity, forget about human ingenuity, Indian ingenuity is of a different order, had kicked in. And yes, bribes, the nature of bribes has changed, the nature of commissions on black money has changed, and that is why I'm fundamentally questioning the, it's child's play to complement the intention to cut out corruption. But really we must look at, question the way in which it has been done politically, that in 3 hours you will disempower 1.3 billion people without consultation, without your chief economic advisor being in the loop, as is the rumor. What kind of hubris does that speak of? And then to merely say, oh, we are not prepared, or we don't have the template. There are news coming in of markets in Tamil Nadu, truckers, workers, mazdoors, fishermen, farmers, people, 90% of this economy is part of the informal cash economy sector. As you mentioned, half of Indians are unbanked. There are only 600 million people who even have banks. In the light of all of that, Ajay, the question I really want to ask you is the great blind spot in India. How has this affected the farm sector? How do you think it is going to dampen the economy in the farm sector in the coming months?
Can you hear me? No. Sorry about this. So I think so, to your question, the first clarification that's required is that the farm sector is not the farm sector in one sense. The farmers are divided into sense of people who own the land and people who work on the land. So the agriculture labor and farm owners are different. And this has got a clear division. People who own the land, people who are sitting in this room, in this place today, are all upset. But the people who don't own the land are relishing in the thought of us being upset and of being stuck with this problem. They are happy about it, that at last the rich have been given it. And that must clearly be understood. There's a division in the nation today on this topic. How long this division will last depends on how logistically they can transfer cash to bank accounts. That's the first part. And there's been reports in the newspaper in the last few days saying that agriculture sowing season, which is on, has been affected. I don't think so it's been affected to the extent that newspapers are talking about it. It's just a 1% difference. I don't think so 1% is big enough to say that that difference has taken place. Having said that, I think this whole move should have come after a month when the sowing would have got over and there would be less problems. There are problems in implementation. But before I end, I must carry from where Mr. Surjit Bhalla said that this is the biggest reform that can ever take place in the country. I think no. I think it's just the beginning, and I'll just quickly throw 3 ideas in the meeting today. One is that we can abolish income tax and have a banking transaction tax. You end 50% of India's corruption. You get the income tax out, right? That's one. Second is abolish all farm subsidies the way they are given. Fertilizer subsidies and whatever you want to call them, water, electricity, finish them the way they are given. No, don't clap. I'm not saying finish subsidies. Just hear me out. Don't jump the gun. I'm saying you give it in a different manner that it's socially equitable for the development of this country. Right now what is happening is most of the subsidies are being taken by 40% of the farmers who have irrigation facilities, and while the distress and suicides are in the 60% which are rain-fed. So as a farmers organization, we have told the government to give subsidies based on a 2-hectare farm. That's a 5-acre farm, which is 85% of Indian farmers. So 85% of Indian farmers would get 85% of the support. Unlike what's happening now, 85% of the farmers are only getting 40% of the support. So that's the second big reform. And the third big reform is to have a moratorium on government salaries for the next 10 years. They really don't deserve it. And these are the 3 reforms I think so the nation will go forward on.
Surjit, I'm just going to come back to you because you've been advocating for additional reforms around this, of course, tax reform, and you've used the phrase that either it's going to be a big bang or a big thud. 2-3 questions I want to put to you. One is that, as I said, it's easy to, of course, applaud the intention to cut out corruption, but we spoke of political corruption. Very, very honestly, yes, it's a masterstroke in terms of having defanged Mayawati and Mulayam on the eve of UP elections. Congress, is pretty much a spent force. JDU, all of them, you know, they've all been caught off guard. First of all,
we don't have money.
okay. But do you really believe that the BJP would not have sorted its own coffers? Would Mr. Modi have hit at his own party? So that's one question. Secondly, that when you're talking about a lowering of taxes, improved tax regime, and we're talking about bringing money into the white economy, the question I want to put to you is that the same people who argue all of this are also arguing for a withdrawal of the state from India's public life. We don't want the government to provide us any services. No education, no health, no infrastructure, everything must move to the private sector. Then why does the government want so much control over our money?
Okay. First, there are too many questions in there. Second, I don't recall being at a meeting with two distinguished commentators and agreeing with sort of 99%. I don't know the last time I was at a meeting with Pavan where I agreed with everything he said. And let me make clear, it may not seem so, but let me make it clear. And the only part I disagree with Ajay is on the banking transactions tax. That's an intellectual disagreement. I'm working on trying to formulate my own views. But there is no...
After you finish your working, you'll agree with me, I think.
Yeah, no. Yeah. Okay? But look, what did I say? I said potentially. This move by itself does nothing to attack the roots of corruption. Nothing. Please don't misunderstand. This does nothing to that. But I think it paves the way for them to bring in additional reforms. And those are the reforms that will be, if you will, comparable to, if not bigger than 1991. So right now, this is not reform. This is not reform. Let me underline that. Now coming to, and we can discuss what are the potential reforms, which I think will be path-breaking for India, not path-breaking for the world. Now coming to the question of, do I really believe that the BJP didn't know it? And whatever, A, B, C. One point you yourself, if the chief economic advisor is rumored to have not known about it, that's point number one. Second, let us look, do you know in any, and you're a student of both domestic and international politics, where a political, and this question goes to Pavan as well as Ajay, where a political leader has gone across and apne pair pe apni kulhadi, has hit at his own constituency. His own constituency are the biggest sufferers from this move. Now, you think, I don't, so one, he's done that very blatantly, okay? Now, could he have, and could the BJP have taken the risk that they will deposit all this money in a country, in a world, where there are no secrets anymore? We are a heavily interconnected world. There are no secrets, which indeed is why the government has faced the implementation problems that they had, because they wanted to keep it a secret. If they just wanted to just help themselves and not hurt anything, there are a million ways that I'm sure I would be able to suggest and Pavan would be able to suggest and everything. Rule that out. It does not make sense. The math does not add up. Now, we can talk about the effectiveness of this or not, absolutely. But to argue that this thing has helped them. Now, one last canard that has been floating around. And you know, let me make it very objective from my point of view. You may not think. I think a lot of the dislocation, a lot of the tension, a lot of the bad implementation is motivated by the parties and individuals who are opposed to the move. Do not think this is a random event that you get money mules, really, and all the TV studios, you're all aware with them, you personally, me personally, everybody else, they are vested interests. He's attacked, big time, the vested interests. Whether he'll succeed or not, separate. So the last point on that. There was this thing, I think, even Chidambaram, person who was supposed to come, I think it was him, but if I'm mistaken, fair enough, about how banking deposits suddenly went up in September or so. Well, it turns out My wife is a professor at IIT, she's a government servant, and her banking deposits went up enormously because of the pay commission. Now you take that out, there isn't any significant increase in banking deposits. Short answer, listen, this is a big gamble. We don't know whether it'll succeed or not, but let us not, if you will, depreciate it by saying this was, if you will, just to help themselves and hit out. Though I do agree that the political opposition, he's hurt himself and he's hurt the other guys. And if electoral reforms do not come about, this will be a thud.
I'm just going to, we'll throw 2 more questions and then move to America because, as I said, it's a vast topic.
There's money there.
There's money. But I think the thing that's bothering me is that when we say that this is a move that in the 10 or 11 days and in the immediate future does not seem to have been well implemented, will certainly not be effective in cutting out corruption because we know it's already, at a middle and lower level, corruption is already kicked in. It may affect the stocking of black money, but the flow of black money will begin the moment 2,000 rupee notes and 500 rupee notes are. So in effect, what is it that we are applauding? When was the last time that we equally, I admit it's a bold move and it's a very, it shows a man of spine. But when was the last time when a government willfully architected distress for its citizens? And we cannot be blind to the distress that people are facing, whether it's short-term and the second round impacts are still to play out. So Pavan, again, I would put to you that he's also arguing for a cashless economy.
It's become cashless.
Yes. But when we are arguing for a cashless economy, we remind ourselves that the infrastructure for that cashless economy doesn't exist. So on what grounds are we really applauding this move?
No, I don't think we are applauding this move in terms of outcomes as yet. And certainly we are critical of the manner in which it was implemented. I don't even think the Prime Minister was fully aware of the tremendous transitional dislocation. 25 lakh trucks of perishable vegetables are stranded. I don't agree entirely with Ajay that rural distress is minimal. We have feedback coming in that even whether it's a wage earner, daily wage earner who doesn't own land, who's not getting his or her daily wages, or whether it's farmers who've just had the harvest and are to begin their sowing operations, it's nothing compared to the kind of inconvenience people in the metropolises are facing. Small businesses, households, shopkeepers, entrepreneurs, laborers, it's a very substantial level of dislocation. So, when we come out of it, as Surjit says, who will draw the balance sheet? Have we achieved the goals with which we began this exercise? I don't believe so. I find it inexplicable that you print 2,000 rupee notes. If the intention was to eradicate black money, I don't think that you print 2,000 rupee notes. And I don't wish to believe unverified rumors, although the reiteration now is very strong that there were some tip-offs. I will not believe or authenticate them until reliable evidence comes into the public realm. However, I can say to you, having moved from diplomacy to politics now, that there is so much evidence mounting to the fact that there were some very strategic tip-offs and that those who could already have sent their money abroad, it doesn't add to the banking system's volume here, but it's gone where it needs to. And I can also tell you what other political leaders I've heard are doing. One political leader in UP, on hearing the news at 8 o'clock, and this is something I've heard, I'm not saying this is what happened. You have to be very careful these days. So I believe she told, doesn't matter. That asked the 400 candidates of a party who had been nominated for the forthcoming UP elections to be at her house at 8 in the morning. And this leader then gave each of them a duffel bag. The gender is neutral, by the way. A duffel bag of rupees 25 lakhs each, and cumulatively, therefore, it amounts to 100 crores, and asked them to use existing mechanisms by which this could be converted gradually into white. So what I'm saying is, I keep repeating this, that these kind of measures, and one of the great fallacies of time, just 1 second, Shoma, last thought. One of the great fallacies is that if it's bold, big and dramatic, it's good. It doesn't translate like that. You can make the most dramatic decision, and that's why Muhammad bin Tughlaq took everyone to Daulatabad. It was the most unprecedented, bold, dramatic, unheard of decision. But it was not necessarily good. So I'll say the jury is out. I'm willing to give it time, but I'm not willing to believe in every respect that it was well thought out and it will achieve the goals for which it was taken.
Last question before we shift to America, which is, I think the interesting question here politically is that he has hit his core constituency. The traders, the small and medium business enterprises who are, historically, they have been BJP supporters. Pavan and Surjit, to both of you, I would ask this question. What is your hunch? You know, I also agree with Surjit that there is a kind of mass psychology. Again, just as a training of a journalist is to basically speak to every person on the street you can meet and less to commentators. And there is this feeling कि हमको बहुत परेशानी हो रहा है, but रईसों को चोट लगा है. And I think that that kind of mass Molotov cocktail, you know, that stone you want to throw at people, Modi has really bet on that. That's my hunch. What is your own sense, Pavan? UP elections is coming up. Do you think this is going to stand him in good stead or not?
It's too early to say, Shoma. If the transitional period of fairly extreme inconvenience and dislocation is telescoped, if the government takes the requisite measures, including emergency measures, in order to get the economy back onto the rails, I believe it may not become a big issue in the UP elections. But if that doesn't happen, you never know where public anger is simmering and how it will express itself at the time of the hustings.
Yeah, Ajay, to come back to the farm sector, you know, I was surprised when you said that the farming sector, the sowing is not that affected, and that, you know, that this rage again is divided. The fact of the matter, Ajay, is that also the rural cooperative banking system has been disabled in this move. While the Modi government has allowed the private sector banking and the national banks to exchange money, to allow deposits, they have inexplicably absolutely disabled the cooperative banking system. I continue to ask, how can a government risk architecting distress for an already distressed community, which is 800 million people strong? You're from that sector, and I ask you with great bewilderment.
So I never said they're not distressed. I said they're bearing their distress because they're happy to see the other lot even more distressed. That's what I said. So there's a difference between the two things. And I also think leaders are responsive and leaders are reactive to masses. But responsive and reactive leaders don't necessarily make responsible prime ministers. And there's a clear distinction on that. For example, I bank with a cooperative bank in my village. And so I'm just telling you how the division is, how urban perception moves the conversation in this nation. Onions go expensive, farmers suffer, you know, that kind of thing. So I'll just take this example of a cooperative bank. Now, just imagine that, and it is true. So if I have taken a loan from my cooperative bank, now I'm not allowed to go and deposit money in my own bank account. I'm not allowed to exchange money in where I'm banking. And the cooperative bank has no money to give. So when you see public sector and private sector banks in all the cities with long lines, every media, newspapers filled with ATM photographs. I mean, not even, I think so 5% does transaction with an ATM. Nobody's bothered about empty bank branches in villages which have no cash to give. And it is distressing. I'm not saying it's not distressing, but That's the division I'm trying to tell you. And look at the irony of the situation. I've taken a loan from the bank. I have a 500 rupee note or a 1,000 rupee note. The government is allowing the rest of the nation to deposit it in the bank. I can't deposit it in the bank. So the interest burden on my bank account, I'm still paying interest on something that the government is refusing to accept money. And when something like that happens, I think so it's disastrous policy. I think the RBI governor is completely responsible for this because he is the person who has to advise the Prime Minister on what is required. We cannot expect the Prime Minister to know impact of every policy fine print that happens. And he's, no, because the RBI governor has got to tell him.
When he takes personal onus for it, he must know what he's up to.
I just want to intervene here. I cannot understand how you can exonerate a person who is the chief executive. Now, this is not political partisanship. I would hold my own leader to account for that. If you take a step which is so drastic in its potential consequences, and the person then announces himself each move, including the details of it, on national telecast, how can you say that he can't be held responsible on the detailing and the micro-detailing of the program?
Yeah, absolutely. I'm going to shift to Ajay. We'll come back. Okay.
Just one second. I'm just saying that the RBI governor is the point man for the banking sector. He's just disappeared from the TV screens. He's not available. He's not commenting on it. I think the whole...
That's also perhaps because the great leader doesn't enjoy sharing TV time.
That's possible.
No, but they are, but he likes sharing TV time with Ministry of Finance bureaucrats.
Yes,
So,
with the bureaucrats, not with the minister.
Before you shift, on this thing, on rural distress, as you know, my #1 message is, be careful in these radical times of what you read and what the truth is. One newspaper had the following headline, that basically acreage for the rabi crop has drastically fallen. Headline. Then in their own article, they have the following, that last year, as of November 18th, that there was 14.33 million hectares planted, and this is 14.13 million hectares planted. Okay. Now, 1 second. Then another newspaper had the headline as to how wheat prices, despite all of this, have actually gone up, because we're all saying that blah, blah, blah. Well, it turns out that the procurement prices for wheat were announced 2 weeks ago, and it is up 8%, which is the 6% the government is saying. So, you know, the sensationalism, ideological sensationalism, I think needs to be discounted.
Surjit, I'm totally with you, but I just, before we shift to America, I'd like to share a few statistics, and, you know, we can discuss them over dinner. But again, I hope I don't come across as doctrinaire anti-Mr. Modi, because I'm not, you know. Like everyone, I would applaud the desire to root out corruption. But I think he has a predilection for the big and the bold and the brash, because, you know, he announced that he would create 100 million jobs in India. In the last 2015, we have created 1.35 lakh jobs, when 12 million people, 120 lakh people, enter the job market every year. He announced that Swachh Bharat would clean up India. You know, we spent money on it. It's just, in Gujarat, it's just the big announcements, the big mela, the big mass psychological management, you know. And I think that that is worrying, because when you cut through process and you cut through institutions, and the RBI governor ends up looking like an adjunct to Mr. Modi, I do believe that we need to worry about these things, even if it is unpopular to say so. And those are some of, you know, and I could go on with the statistics about the unorganized sector, the people who cannot access cash, people who are not educated to read plastic money. What are we talking about? You know, we're talking about 10% of India. 90% of India is not part of this conversation. And I don't say that as a bleeding heart left. I just say that as pure statistics. And I think that's a good point to move to America, where, again, everybody has been upended by their understanding of America, by the closed room media conversations about why Hillary would win. And people did not tap into the kind of rage that was simmering. So again, I'll just run through all of you with 2 questions. 1, what do you think really happened in America? And 2, what is the lessons that America has for the world and for India? Surjit, you go first.
Yeah. You know, right now I'm terribly, if you will, uncertain about the lessons. But I think one of the lessons from the American election is don't be too quick to draw lessons. Let me explain. And as some of you might know, I thought Hillary would win easily, and I had a double-digit forecast, and I was massively wrong. And I've been studying elections since graduate school in the mid-1970s on an empirical basis. There is not one election in history anywhere in the world, and it's interesting that two unprecedented actions, we got a double whammy, have taken place within a day of each other. There were 53 opinion polls prior to the election, the final one of each of those, and only 3 of them had forecast a Trump victory. And let me tell you, all 3 of them were wrong, because every pollster makes a forecast on the popular vote. There is no pollster I know who's ever made a forecast on the electoral vote. So not only the whole class failed, the whole world failed. Now, given that we are talking about, if you will, the Electoral College, that from there to draw lessons about hate, etc., or whatever it is that the world has changed, we would have a very different conversation at literally the flip of a coin. One final, I don't know, we talked about it earlier, that one final comment as to what actually happened. And this is a work in progress, and as soon as it is finished, which will be next week, I will publish it. But what is the most interesting part for me in this election is the fact that the American white male, the redneck, voted more for Hillary than he did for Ronald Reagan in 1980. So the redneck voted more for Hillary than he did for Ronald Reagan, and the one group of people which really decided the election, and indeed it was the very basis on which I had made my forecast, was college-educated white women did Clinton in, or helped Trump win. In other words, they voted much more than anybody expected, whether it's me or Nate Silver or anybody else, expected the white women to vote 55-45 for Hillary, and they voted something like 45-55 for Hillary.
Surjit, that's a good point at which I just ask our console. You know, it's in a way important to recall the mood in which Mr. Trump won, the circumstances in which he won. It's only 10 days old, but you know, we'll recall that for a minute before we continue our conversation.
And which Republican candidate has the best chance of winning the general election?
Of the declared ones, right now, Donald Trump.
Could he actually win?
No freaking way! Oh my God!
Raise your hand if you predicted this a year ago. Trump is the Republican Party's presumptive nominee for president.
Who are these people? What drives them?
Most of them are childless single men who masturbate to anime.
These people live in that constant state of fear.
If you hurt my friends, then you hurt my pride. I gotta be a man, I can't let it slide. I am a real American.
And Mexico will pay for the wall.
Frankly, let's say you get rid of Assad or you knock out that government, who's going to take over? The people that were backing, and then you're going to have, like, Libya?
Well, I'm not a big believer in man-made climate change.
And you do have experience. I'd say the one thing you have over me is experience, but it's bad experience because what you've done has turned out badly.
But what we want to do is to replenish the Social Security Trust Fund.
We are in a rigged system. And a big part of the rigging are these dishonest people in the media.
I am a real American. Fight for the rights of every man.
Hey, when you're a star, they let you do it. You can do anything.
Whatever you want.
Grab him by the pussy. I can do anything.
He's a punk. He's a dog. He's a pig. He's a con, a bullshit artist, a mutt. Talks how he wants to punch people in the face. Well, I'd like to punch him in the face.
President Obama will go down as perhaps the worst president in the history of the United States! Exclamation point at real Donald Trump. Well, at real Donald Trump, at least I will go down as a president.
The racist, sexist, homophobic, xenophobic, Islamophobic, you name it. You could put half of Trump supporters into what I call the basket of deplorables.
He is the human Molotov cocktail that they've been waiting for. The career politicians hate Trump. The media hates Trump. Trump's election is going to be the biggest fuck you ever recorded in human history.
She fought very hard.
Everybody is crying.
And I was slowly getting drunk is what happened to me.
You're not dead and you haven't gone to hell. This is your life now. This is our election now. This is us. This is our country.
We don't debate anymore because the left won the cultural war. So if you're on the right, you're a freak. You're evil, you're racist, you're stupid. You are a basket of deplorables. How do you think people are going to vote if you talk to them like that?
Be true to yourself, true to your country. Be a real American. Whew.
Well, that's really to recall the phenomenon we are talking about, Pavan. And I think Surjit makes a good point that it's a moment for humility for all commentators, all analysts, all number crunchers, all prophecists. But I would still ask you, Pavan, the messaging coming back from this is that people are in an economic crunch. You know, there is an anti-global mood, an anti-elite mood, bizarrely an anti-capitalist mood in terms of business as usual. And yet it is a Mr. Trump, the very epitome of selfish capitalism, that intuits that mood. How do you read this, Pavan, as a politician?
Let me say three things. First of all, it's not the first time that upsets have happened in elections. Even though Surjit rarely goes wrong.
Universal upset.
Surjit rarely goes wrong. He predicted the Bihar elections almost to a T. So I give him credit. But all good men go wrong sometimes. As far as I'm concerned, Donald Trump has won. I don't believe it's necessarily bad for India. But that's not my essential point. I want to make two intellectual arguments before you. First of all, I think, and I'm liberal by instinct, I think liberalism had become too complacent, too smug in its own self-righteousness and its self-evident validity. It needs to be challenged. It needs to fight back again. And so many assumptions that we took to be gospel truth, if they are challenged, it doesn't mean they are wrong, but it means that they need reassertion, and history is cyclical. Secondly, I think globalization itself and its success has spawned many mythologies, one of which is that the world has shrunk to a small village and we've become mirror images of each other. It's not true. Cultures are still different. Many cultures are very opaque. The assumption that somehow every salad bowl is becoming a melting pot is not happening. And there is bound to be a certain reaction when you make civilizations and countries more porous to each other than the tolerance level allows. And I say this because I've seen the reaction in Brexit. I know what's happening in Europe and what may happen in France. I know it's happened in America, where there was a sense of a kind of revolt against the assumptions of globalization, that it's always good, that it's always interfaces, that it always melds, that it always conjoins, that it always produces something which is the most acceptable synthesis. It's not true. And when I say cultures are opaque, if you'll allow me 1 minute, I want to tell you an anecdote. So much is common now between people like us and what we see around the world. You were watching this, it was familiar. Everybody eats McDonald's, watches television, is on the internet, and so on and so forth. But I tell this story only to illustrate how cultures still are different. There was this Indian bureaucrat, a lady who went to France on Karwa Chauth. And she had not eaten the whole day. And because she would eat only once she saw the moon, she tried to go to the top floor, the terrace of a hotel, to see the moon. But that was forbidden, prohibited area. And in doing so, she tripped an alarm. And in literally minutes, the police was there. Her French was not too good, their English was not too good, but they could not understand. They asked her, why you are there? She said, I wanted to see the moon. They asked her why. She said, because I want to eat. They said, what's the connection between food and the moon and your food? She said, no, but I'm doing this for my husband. They said, where is he? They said, he's in India. They said, oh, but you are here. What's the connection between the... And this went on and on. And these are two
Night Live show, yeah.
These are two global citizens. And yet cultures are opaque. Finally, the police took her to the police station. The Indian embassy had to be called. There was a French translator, and they finally let her go without still understanding why she had broken the law to see the moon, to eat for the good of her husband, who was 5,000 kilometers away.
You know, Ajay has asked to be left out of the America conversation for the time being.
Okay. I'll just...
You want to come into it? Okay.
I think so. We have a lot in common with what's happened in America and what is happening here in India, and what will happen also is that the people need to trust their leader. And I think so Hillary was not trusted with all that she had done over the last 10, 20 years, being wherever she was in power. So there was a trust deficit. And the second thing that is common to what's happened in America and what's common here is the inequality in society. Too much wealth in few hands will have a repercussion. And that's exactly what's happened in America. It's nothing more than that. It's just a reaction to too much wealth. And here was Trump who...
That's why they voted for Trump.
So, no, because the people were reacting against the system. The system was unequal. It was Hillary Clinton represented the system that existed for those 10, 15, 20 years, and that's what they were reacting against. And this perception, it's all about perception. It's not about if corruption is going to go down, if black money is going to go away because of what's demonetization. It's the perception of the people that is important, and that's important. For example, this scheme, this program, like many believe, and I'm not sure what's going to happen, may fail and everyone will be in a terrible, distressed position. But what if Mr. Modi puts 10,000 rupees in every Jan Dhan account? I mean, who cares if the people don't care if black money is gone or not gone? Every Jan Dhan account gets 10,000 rupees. It's more or less something like what all the bureaucrats are getting as enhancement of salary for 2 years or 1 year. And I think so the perception across the country is going to be that he's taken the black money from the rich people and he's given the black money to the poor people. And that's what drives the conversation. And whoever drives the conversation wins elections in India. Whoever reacts to it, I don't think so wins. Mr. Bhalla will be able to tell you better, but in the villages, that's what I see.
You know, we're going to run out of time. So Ajay, I'm going to use your point as a takeoff for the name of our session, which is the rise of the precariat. And you said part of the problem is that there's too much concentration of wealth in the rich. And part of why Mr. Trump, one of the richest tax evaders in the world, won was because he indeed could intuit that mood. And I agree with you that it is the era of the media, and what you say, how you drive people's mood, it doesn't matter. The facts don't matter. It doesn't matter that we created 1.35 lakh jobs last year. It matters that he promised 100 million jobs. So to come to the precariat, that what is the new ideas that we need for the economy across the world? Is it okay to go back to business as usual? Is it okay to just keep pushing for more manufacturing when the ecology, when globalization, technology, mechanization, robotization, everything is showing that labor and jobs are shrinking? How is human emotions reacting to that? And that is why we call this session the rise of the precariat. There's a friend in the audience who first at least brought me in touch with this idea. It's a professor called Guy Standing in the SOAS in the London School of, in London University. And he's speaking of this new class of people called the precariat, which is basically attaching the idea of precariousness to the proletariat. A class of people who are living without predictability, without stability, with no security, with the great unknown unknowns, where capital is forcing you to live with the idea of unstable labor, where your job identity no longer defines you, where the nation state is receding, you are moving from becoming citizens to denizens, you have no rights, no welfare state, no pension, no securities, and global capital is constantly chasing cheap labor, and so it's moving away from you and your own backyard. You don't see the prosperity that others are profiting from. And so that makes you ready to be anti-liberal, anti-immigrant, enjoy political extremism, enjoy muscular leadership. He's speaking of this as the precariat. And he speaks of it across class, that they are working class people, they are educated people who don't have a sense of future. And it's a very, very interesting thesis. I merely shared that so that we can move to asking all three of you that would you accept that India too has its own precariat? Is it true that we no longer can argue for the same old ideas of the economy? That we cannot keep believing that manufacturing is going to create jobs? That the farming sector can be seen as unproductive? When 800 million people look after themselves, they may not add to the GDP, but they're not part of your social problem. Do economists, do political thinkers, do political philosophers have to come up with new ideas? Is this the real wake-up call? Surjit, can I start with you?
You know,
I'm sorry, that's many questions.
I've got 5 PhD theses, and I don't know which PhD thesis to start on. But let me take this I remember this night for a long, long time, because what Pavan said earlier, that it doesn't mean that liberal ideas are going to be vanquished, but it does mean that we should take this questioning in a very, very intelligent and forward fashion. So Pavan, this night won't come again. I can assure you, where I'm in
agreement with you. He can't believe he's in agreement with you, Pavan.
Now to the more serious part. I don't know where to begin, but if you just give me 1 minute or 2 minutes just to lay
This is not a television show.
Okay, so perfect.
We'll postpone drinks to listen to you.
The Guy Standing thesis, the first question I would ask, is it for England, or is it for Western world, or is it for the world? Now, one of the most remarkable things that has happened over the last 35 years, and you date it from 1980, is that world inequality today is at the same level as it was in 1870. Very, very equal. And you don't have to be a mathematician, you don't have to be a statistician in order to understand that. India and China have, if you will, 2.3 billion people, 2.4 billion people, about 40% of the world's population, which around 1980 were given up for dead. And if you don't believe me, believe Gunnar Myrdal, who got a Nobel Prize for giving us up for dead. These two economies together on a per capita basis have grown at 6% per annum. The white nations, if you will, have grown at something like 1.5% per annum. So, this kind of development has never ever taken place before. Again, so who are the precariat? Certainly, from a world level, not the 6 billion people who live in the developing countries, and if you will, not even the 1 billion people living in the Western world. Now, coming to the Western world, and with Trump's election, you have that the US today has the unemployment, the labor force unemployment claims, which come out on a weekly basis, is at a 47-year low. This is claims that people who don't have a job Go ahead. Then there is the story that, listen, the great America voted for Obama in 2008, and at that time you could excuse them because the world was in a crisis, a great capitalist crisis. We thought the world would come to an end. And then they voted again in 2012, and from 2012 to 2016, the precariat in the US now, just for the US, has done better than any 4-year period in history. So I don't know where to begin. Inequality, and last point on the wealth side. And all my friends, the Credit Suisses of the world, everybody says how world, 1% has 99%, right, of the wealth in the world. Wealth, not income. Funny. But you know what? 99% of the people in the world, their wealth is in their education. We don't, 99.5% of the world, their wealth is education, which is the stream of income that their one and only asset can give them. If you now include education as part of wealth, which I think you should, which is what any concept, what is wealth? Wealth is a store of value, which gives you a stream of income. So therefore, I am contending that the wealth in the world is more equal today than at any time in history.
Surjit, I have to say that is a greater shifting of goalposts than even the demonetization move, to suddenly call education equivalent to the wealth of what...
Individual. Ask anybody here.
Well, in global economies where even being educated can no longer get you jobs, that is part of the problem. I mean, we're just speaking about the fact that 400 million people are going to join the job sector in India, and there are no jobs. There are no jobs.
Okay, now we have to break the monologue.
Pavan, we'll have to come because we're running out of time.
First of all, 100 million is wrong. It's 10 million. The 400 million is the total size of the labor force in India, not the addition to it.
Yes, 12 million join it every year. We are creating 1.35 lakh jobs. What are we speaking of, Pavan? And of course, and Pavan.
Let's calm down, all of us. First of all, Mr. Guy Standing, whom I must read in greater detail, has coined a clever word, but I think he has to make arguments country-specific. India has always had a precariat. It's nothing new. But if you look at it from the Indian prism, it's not that this precariat has remained frozen in time. Somewhere in the evolution of our rather inadequate yet substantial achievements since 1947, the waterline of hope, Shoma, has been just a little above the waterline of despair. If nothing else, from 1991, when this country began to see for the next decade growth rates of 8 to 9%, more people were redeemed from below the poverty line than in 25 years of socialism. And therefore, I believe that this sense of upward mobility, this hope, even a peon who gets a job under an affirmative action is hoping for his son or daughter to become an engineer. Those who have a cycle are dreaming of a scooter and so on and so forth. It's a spiral. Secondly, political empowerment. Political empowerment is about people getting a stake in the system, even if they know that they are at the receiving end of an institutionally inequitable system. But they have the hope that they can fight to change it. And that, again, buoys people up. Now, what is the demand today if there is a precariat which is growing in size? You must have in our country the reiteration of the need of growth with justice. Unless the dividends of economic growth don't reach the millions upon millions of the deprived in a more substantial manner. Because it's, except in fantasy, you cannot build the first floor of a building without a ground floor or a basement. And in that process, in that project, all of us need to be aware. We cannot secede to form our own republic. मरना यहाँ, जीना यहाँ, सबको साथ ही मरना जीना है. So therefore, if in India, I just want to conclude by saying, if in India we produce the largest number of doctors and engineers, and we at the same time have the largest number of people who can't read and write, if we have the fastest emerging number of billionaires, and yet the largest number of the abjectly poor in the world, if we have very fast emerging super speciality hospitals and the largest number of malnutrition children, more than sub-Saharan Africa, then there's something inequitable in the system, which if you don't correct, one of the ways in which you finesse that distress is ultranationalism. You subsume that sense of inequity by a sense of Rashtravad. That nationalism, xenophobia, hatred against the other will subsume that sense of being excluded. And that's the danger.
That's very well said, Pavan. And one of the most memorable lines for me is the waterline of hope being above the waterline of despair. We better stay committed to that. Ajay, I'll have to ask you to speak literally for 1 minute. What is your one new idea for the economy that the learnings of these weeks have been?
Let's have a drink.
No, not so fast. The economists have spoken, the administrators have spoken. When it comes to farmers, you say you got 1 minute, and that's the idea. That's the problem. And that's why we have inequality in the system. For once, I agree with Pavanji what he said. On everything he said, I absolutely am in agreement. And Surjit Bhalla Ji, the inequality may have been same as per statistics and economics, because it can always be torture to prove what you want to prove.
Well
but
said.
Social media has made that inequality visible, and that is where the backlash is coming from. And because it's the ending, my one statement is very simple. Everybody in cities says that farmers are the pampered lot, and you're given subsidies and X, Y, Z. So yes, everyone's been. That's your opinion, but most people think that farmers are the pampered lot. It's a romantic thing to have. Everybody here thinks they want to do farming in their pastime and their retirement. But let me just tell you this. It's only because we give subsidies to farmers that farmers stay on the farms. That's why you get food which is cheap. Because if you stop giving subsidies, you stop giving support to farmers, they will all flock to cities. And why you need boundary walls around your houses? Why do you need security guards? Why do you need everything? It's because all that subsidies is doing is that saying कि liquid oxygen में डाल दो, liquid मरने नहीं देगा, liquid oxygen मरने नहीं देगा, and
liquid
जीने नहीं देगा. That's what subsidies are doing. You're just keeping us at that level, and that's the inequality. That backlash is coming for the urban classes, and you should be all prepared for it. That's all I can say.
Surjit, I'll have to stop this here because we have a cocktail break coming up, and then, of course, another conversation, again about chaos and redemption. They're just strands of conversations that we have opened up here. But I would, like to abdicate the position of being merely a moderator and add my voice to Ajay's, which is to say that I think the real challenge here is to rethink some paradigms of the economy. It is not to be anti-manufacturing, it is not to be anti-globalization, it's not to be anti-capitalism, but it is indeed to recalibrate how we look at millions of people who look after themselves, who may not add to the formal GDP, but who are economically productive, who are socially non-threatening, who really are looking after themselves. How can we enhance that? Because the other strand of conversation I would have liked to open up today is that ecology is the economic conversation we never have. There is a limit to what we can do, how far we can go, and if we just cast our minds back to 10 days back, we know what kind of world we are creating, not just for our children, but for ourselves in the here and now. The polar caps are 30 degrees hotter than it used to be, and when we are speaking of manufacturing and globalization, let's keep reminding ourselves that technology is making us less and less a labor-absorbent culture. Manufacturing is mechanized. Big capital does not create jobs. There is human emotion attached to the economy. How are we going to deal with that? Those are just opening ideas for many more conversations. Thank you very much, all of you. and we'll regather for Sanjay Dutt in a little while. Thank you.